Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. Thank you so much for joining us. Today is a special video because I have my friend Amanda here. I am really excited to have her here because she has recently started sharing about her mental health journey on her platform. I'm definitely going to link her blog and her Instagram below. You should 100% follow her. She's great. Funny thing about Amanda is that we actually went to the same college. We were in different classes and we always bumped into each other, and like I would say like, hey, how's it going, and vice versa, but we never like, it's so funny going back now and like reading your blog from last month. If any of you want to check it out, her blog where she actually discusses in detail her mental health journey is in May. It was during Mental Health Awareness Month, and it was so nice to see somebody else like contributing to the space during Mental Health Awareness Month, so I don't feel like I'm the only one sharing my feelings online. But yeah, so one of the crazy things is like we both apparently were struggling with depression and anxiety in college at the same time, and we had no idea, which is kind of sad, but I guess everything's for a reason, and we were all both going through our own paths. And I think you'd agree that there are certain phases of the mental health journey where you can't really help another person. Right. But it is nice to be able to go, oh yeah, I totally understand what you're talking about. You know, like I can explain to you like how my brain works, and it's like you're not confused by it.
Yeah, like I get it, and that's like important. Yeah.
It's super comforting. So hopefully that'll be what this is, like what we got today from just talking and hanging out, that this video will also be that for you guys, that you'll be sitting here watching this and be like, oh my gosh, these people understand me, because that's what we're here for. That's why we're sharing our journey online and we're being open. I think the reason why we both are resonating and like vibing well with each other is because we both started to just become very open online and start these platforms because we know what it feels like to be alone in it, and we know what it feels like to just kind of feel completely lost and have no guidance. And so through our journeys, and you share this in your blog, where we're not on the other side, we're definitely not, we're not gurus, we're not done, but we've learned a lot along the way. And I would say I've been proactively struggling with this maybe for 2 or 3 years now. How long would you say?
Probably about the same, 3 years.
Because we both were dealing with it at the same time. Yeah, so it's been a few years. So we learned a lot along the way, and that's what we want to share with you guys. But just so that you guys can get to know Amanda a little bit better, if you could just share briefly your mental health journey, like your first experience with anxiety and like when you finally gave those things a name, like just go through that for us.
Yeah. So, I guess anxiety, so I've discovered that I suffer from both anxiety and depression at different stages in my life, but anxiety definitely came first. For me, it was something that was kind of always present when I was a little kid, and I didn't understand like what was going on. Why was I so scared of this or that that wasn't rational, or why would I have breakdowns or stuff like that? So it's like, it's one of those things that in retrospect, you look back and you can totally see it was present, but I didn't actually understand or, delve into it or acknowledge it until I was much, much older. But that was definitely kind of the start of me realizing, oh, there's something wrong. That didn't happen until I was in college. So in college is really where everything kind of came out. In terms of my depression, that was also something that happened early on in college, where I actually started experiencing like, what is this like feeling like, and starting really to ask questions and learn more about it and try to understand it. So really, I guess if you look at it, I've been struggling with both of these things for a while, but in terms of addressing them, it came much later. And I guess like I didn't start sharing about it until I felt like I was confident that it was okay to be feeling this way, because there is so much of like a connotation of, shame and kind of still like the stigma and all that stuff that keeps us from sharing because we're just so afraid of what's going to happen. So, when I shared it on my blog, that was the first time that I publicly kind of acknowledged and, dealt through it all, kind of processed, on paper, what it was that I went through. And so that was, something that I think should have happened a long time ago, but I'm super glad that this, like, there's definitely been more of an openness to the conversation about it. So
that's so awesome.
Yeah. So like my journey kind of spans long time, and I'm still going through it too.
Yeah. Well, I think definitely give yourself a lot of credit for even sharing it's a really hard thing to do. Like, I don't think people realize just how hard it is to do. To even sit here in front of the camera, it's very hard to do. People tell me like, you're so natural on camera, and I'm like, I am freaking out. My pets my pits are sweating. Like, it is not easy to be here, especially we talk about these things, but I think we both understand the value of, like, when we were going through this darkness, and we still do go through these phases, right? It's like some of the things that really pull me out are somebody else speaking about their experiences. So it's just like, I value it so much, and I try to put that out, and so do you. And I think definitely don't feel like oh, it should have happened sooner. Like, I think it happened at the right time for you, when it was supposed to happen, and like, you should just be like, pat yourself on the back for that one. That's something that I'm learning to do more. Like, literally, like, if I'm doing the dishes, or if I got up out of bed, or if I like actually did my hair today, I'm like, like, just being better about saying good job to yourself, like, I think is super important. But
I think it's a funny kind of phenomenon that happens within, I guess, our culture, or like social media, I don't know, but where you start to feel like you can't give yourself credit unless you've done something that's as good or better as this person or that person. And that's so toxic to me, because you're like, oh, I can't talk about it unless I'm, gone through it, or I can't, process what I'm going through because someone else is going through something worse. It's like, it takes away your right to talk about it. So I'm really glad that that you're sharing, and that more people are actually joining the conversation and sharing what they've been through.
That's awesome. I love that you just said, like, it's toxic to compare, like, basically what you're doing to someone else's victory, because you should only really compare your victory to yourself. Like, if you're someone who's never exercised and you did a 10-minute workout, you can't look at someone who does 45-minute workouts every single day and be like, well, I didn't do that, so I can't be proud of myself. It's like, no, like, you just did something incredible doing this 10-minute workout, because you never worked out before. And the same thing with having mental health problems. Like, I started to lie to myself and tell myself that, oh, so what, that you have anxiety and depression. But like, it took me 22 years to get to that point of being like, yes, I have anxiety and depression. I can say it out loud. And then another year before I could say it out loud to my friends. And then another year before I could say it out loud on camera. So I think, acknowledging our small victories is so important. We can make a whole nother video about that, but we don't want this to be forever. So anyway, if you want more details on her whole journey and story, definitely read that blog post. It's really great. She has some awesome tips at the end. And
it's really long.
It's so really long. It's so good though. And like, that's the thing. All my mental health videos are super duper long, but like, the people who watch it, I find they're like, oh, I got so much out of that. So I think I always tell myself and the camera and you guys, I say this video is probably going to be long. It's about mental health. It's about my story. It's hard to talk about, but I'm not making this video for the mainstream. And I don't think when you write content like that you're making it for everybody, because not everybody struggles with this stuff and not everybody's going to get it. And that's fine. You're making it for the few, like, or even that one person that like really needed to hear it. So reminding us content creators of that, I think is so important, because we're just like, oh, we need to be making this like so that everyone will like it. It's like, no, like, not everyone's gonna love your art or your content, and that's okay. It's fine. So anyway, one of the things that I loved about your story and your journey is you put a huge emphasis in your blog about giving it a name, like acknowledging it. And I would say that, and being able to know, like, I have anxiety and depression, because I always felt like, why am I more sad than like this person, or like why am I more anxious, why am I breathing so hard, like why am I having this panic attack? And even just saying that was a panic attack, that took me years. You talk about how giving it a name, it like takes away its power, and it gives you the power then to work on it. And she has this great metaphor, guys, where she talks about calling Voldemort he who must not be named actually gave him more power, because you're not like facing your demon, basically,
and telling it, I'm not afraid of you. I know what you are.
I know what you are.
I'm not gonna live in the fear of, we can't talk about
of the unknown, so how did you get to that point, like, where you were like, I know what this is?
I mean, that took a long time as well. I think part of it, early on, I had an awareness of mental illnesses and struggles, because it was something that a loved one actually struggled with before me. And so I was seeing it kind of through that lens at a young age of, their journey, and obviously everyone's journey is different. But when I started to feel just really like, can this be normal to be this sad, or this, like, to be this? And that's when I started asking questions, and then being like, maybe I have what they had. So kind of like, I don't know if like everyone, maybe there's enough awareness to the point where people are starting to latch onto that faster and like be like, oh, I've noticed these other people struggle with these things. Maybe I have that same issue too. But that's kind of what first introduced me to the possibility. And then I just started, like, there were some Google searches that happened really early on. I was just like, what is this? Like, what am I experiencing? What does this mean? What is anxiety? What is a panic attack? What qualifies it? I looked up, like, symptoms for PTSD. Like, I was just exploring and trying to find answers as to why I was feeling this way. And, I mean, I think part of it was, you know, I was in denial. I didn't want to be like that person that I saw struggling. I was like, please, like, don't make that be me. Like, I don't want to deal with that. I'm normal, like, kind of thing. So there was a little bit of resistance too. Which I think kind of actually prolonged my recovery.
Absolutely.
So, but then, like, once I started, you know, learning about what is depression and what, you know, how do you get through it and all that stuff, that led me to kind of a self-diagnosis to be like, okay, I think this is what I'm struggling with. I think that I need to, you know, get help, or I need to sort through it in a healthy way, because I want to get through it. Like, nobody wants to be like, depressed. Oh, interesting, I have depression. Oh, moving on. Like, you know, that knowledge actually kind of really motivated me to get better. So, and I think in some senses it's also kind of sad, because at that point I was trying to get, you know, a therapist as well. And to some extent you almost have to, I hesitated to go to a therapist because I thought that you had to be diagnosed in order to be worthy of getting the time of a therapist, or like to say that you have anxiety. And other people are like, well, prove it. Like, you know, it seemed like it was like another illness where you can't just say, oh yeah, I think I have, you know, this disease or whatever. You have to kind of have it diagnosed. So I thought it was something that had to come from someone else. And I think that also kind of was a wrong conception, because, you know, you almost have to realize it in yourself, see it in yourself. And then a lot of the people I went to talk to, whether they were counselors or, you know, people who were there to help, they would almost like want me to say I'm depressed before they would then take action and prescribe, you know what I mean?
I got that vibe. I've had 2 therapists. I've had that happen.
It's really funny. Like, I'm not sure like what comes first, the chicken or the egg. But so for me, it was just kind of like, well, what do I do first? Do I have to acknowledge and tell someone that I feel depressed and have anxiety? Or do I have to go see a doctor and tell them, I think this might be what's up, but can you check it out? Like, so that would kind of stalled me in limbo. And that's one thing that I think is really, not broken, but imperfect about our system in terms of mental health care. So anyways,
that was so good. Like, I love when things just like organically bloom out of a conversation that I didn't even intend on it happening. But like, gosh, that is so true. I mean, I had a professional tell me I probably had anxiety, but they didn't diagnose me. And I had another professional tell me that I probably had depression. And I knew that I was feeling really anxious. I knew I was feeling really depressed, but I was scared to look up stuff online. And I think people are really like against like, oh, don't self-diagnose and whatever, because that's not okay. But at the same time, it's like any information is better than no information. And it's that information that initially spurred you probably to start looking for a therapist to get confirmation. And I think it's important to remember that like doctors are humans. Like just the other day, I realized that my son's pediatrician wasn't doing a very good job, and I got a second opinion and learned something completely different that makes more sense as to what I'm seeing as someone who's with my son day in and day out. And so I think it's super important, no matter what illness it is. Like, for instance, if you feel like your stomach's always hurting you and it's always affecting your ability to think, like, and then you just decide to go gluten-free, even though your doctor might tell you, like, that's stupid, there's nothing wrong with you. Like, I've had doctors do all kinds of tests, tell me nothing's wrong. And then, like, finally one doctor said, actually, I think you have anxiety. So I had all these physical symptoms, and every doctor was like, you can't possibly be having debilitating migraines, because we did all these tests and we don't see any source of your migraine. But then finally a doctor was like, look, I'm not a psychologist, but I know that people who have back pain like this and the way that you have it, I've found that they've also had anxiety, and that's connected to your nerves, right? Because your anxiety is in your brain, and your brain's connected to your nerves, and your nerves, you have a lot of them in your spine. And I was experiencing a lot of pain in my spine and right at the base of my neck. And this doctor was smart enough to like be holistic enough to know that just because she did a test and it came back negative doesn't mean there's nothing wrong. And I think that's what sucks when we go to doctors sometimes and we were told that their test came negative and that they don't see anything. It doesn't mean that you are lying to yourself about your illness. Like, why would I want debilitating migraines? Why would I want debilitating back pain? And so I think it's really important to be an advocate for yourself and to do your own research. I don't think there's anything wrong with doing research and even coming up with a diagnosis for yourself and then trying to find someone who can explain to you if you have it or not. And don't just settle if one therapist tells you no. Like, you should keep searching, because if you're not happy, like, there's a reason. And I think that's why I love that you just kept searching and you were like confused, like, oh, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? But it's like, while you're still figuring all of that out, you're still searching for the right answer. And there's so many times in my journey in physical ailments and mental illness where if someone told me they couldn't find it, then it just further confirmed to me almost like that I must be lying to myself or making this up. And that's so debilitating. So if there's one takeaway we want everyone to take from this video, it's like, if you feel like there's something wrong, like, trust yourself enough and respect yourself enough to acknowledge your pain. Seriously, if no one's going to acknowledge it, at least you have to acknowledge it, because at the end of the day, you have to be your own advocate, and you know you're not doing well. And the tough part about mental illness is that it's subjective in the sense that if you look at someone else, you're like, well, how come I'm way more sad than that person is? Like, we don't really know what's going on in someone else's head. So I think at the end of the day, what matters is how come I'm sad and not as happy as I know I could be? Because a lot of times, like, people aren't depressed like straight out of the womb. Like, we have moments, like, I have moments where I remember when I was really happy. And so I'd be able to compare it to my old self and be like, I remember when this activity used to bring me a lot of joy, and now nothing's bringing me joy. And in your blog, you actually, when you're describing depression, it was so cathartic for me reading it, because it was like, finally someone's describing how I'm feeling. And you were saying how it's like, you could care less whether you ate or not, drank or not, slept or not, like, none of it mattered. And then you mentioned like the feeling of being passively suicidal, which I haven't talked about suicide on this channel. It's a really dark topic. It's really difficult. I've known 2 people personally who've committed suicide, so it's just not something I like to talk about. However, in the light of Anthony Bourdain and Kate Spade's deaths, it's just really shaking me to my core. Like, I didn't even know these people, and it's shaking me to my core. So I think it's worth bringing up and just mentioning that there's different kinds of suicidal thoughts. There's one where you have a plan. There's one where you kind of are just fantasizing about it, but you don't really know how you do it. And then there's another type of suicidal thoughts, where it's passive suicidalness that you mentioned, where basically you don't have a plan, but how did you describe it? So I heard it described where you don't want to die, but you don't feel like you have the strength to continue living. Like, it's that simple and no one had ever described that to me before as being valid, I guess. And the first time I read it I think it was an article for, I think it was either To Write Love on Her Arms or The Mighty, but they were talking about, like, you know, this feeling, and I was like, that's it, like, no one's ever said that. So it was like so interesting to see, like, that's what I was feeling, and that's valid, because for me it almost was kind of not a comparison issue, but where you're like, well, I feel these thoughts that I can't, like, living is impossible, and I'm defeated all the time, and, like, I can't imagine a future, and I can't imagine the pain stopping, and I just want it to stop. And feeling that, like, people saying, yeah, I felt that too, like, that is serious, and it's not, like, a lot of times people will treat suicide like, oh, it's only serious if you're, like, about to do it. If you have a plan, or if you've almost done it or attempted. And it's like, that's only those people, like, you know, they're serious. Everyone else is, you know, they're like, you don't need to call the suicide hotline unless you have a knife in your hand. Exactly. It was like this whole thing where like, I didn't know where I fell. I didn't know where I fit in within that. And obviously it's not something I'm proud of, not something that I wanted to, you know, to feel or do. To be suicidal, be one of those people. But I think there was just so much confusion about, like, so to hear someone say, like, yeah, like, passive suicidalness is actually, you know, it's a thing, and I understand, and like, it's in I've that category, and it's serious. And I didn't even know what it was called before then, but when I heard that phrase, I was like, that's it, passively suicidal, like, that resonates, like, that makes sense. Your blog was the first time I've ever heard that, and every time I saw a therapist and they wanted me to describe what I meant when I said, I'm wondering if I'm suicidal, they're like, what do you mean you're wondering? Either you are or you aren't. And it was like, okay, well, what is it like if I don't have a plan, but I have no desire or will to live anymore, and I'm in so much excruciating pain, and I just want it to stop any way possible, and I feel like I'm in this very fragile place where I could make a really stupid decision, and I could do something that isn't good for me, or I couldn't care if I was hurt or harmed, even if it was from myself. And I think it really is a seed that starts you on the path to having a plan eventually. And I would say for me that knowing that I have a husband that needs me and a son that needs me, it's like that, those have kept me as grounded as possible in those moments. But it was the first time that I'd ever heard that, and that's why I really wanted to talk about it, especially in the light of the fact that 2 huge people, like, in our culture, Anthony Bourdain and Kate Spade, killed themselves so tragically. can't even process it. But that's why I thought it was worth mentioning.
You wonder, like, at what point, you know, if
did
we
it
were
turn from passive suicide
if
to
we were more
actual
aware, if
active?
we as a culture were more aware of how this starts, like, it doesn't just start where you commit suicide. Like,
Right.
if we were more aware of what happens before, and, you know, if we knew how to talk to them, and if they knew what it was, if they could, like, maybe if they had read the same article I'd read, they would have been like,
Right.
oh, that's the start of it. Like, it just, so much of it is there's a lack of awareness, and there's a lack of an ability for us to talk about it and to have the
and not
vocabulary.
everyone's gonna wake up and just Google, like, I wonder if I'm suicidal, like, what are these feelings? Like, not everyone is gonna be as proactive. I think even as you were, where you were, like, researching all of this stuff to try to get a diagnosis for yourself, try to get an understanding of, okay, here are my symptoms, what is it called? And you're like, oh, a panic attack. I'm having a panic attack. People who have anxiety have panic attacks. Not everybody does that. I didn't. I'm one of those ignorance is bliss people, for honestly, for the worst. And I choose to not research because I don't want to get freaked out and read something and then get sent into a panic attack after I read it. So that's why I think it is important. We were just talking about this earlier, you guys, that as content creators, we have an insecurity of, like, well, we're not the first ones doing this, you know, and our content's not 100% original and whatever. But the fact is that if the more people who talk about this, the better, right? Because then it's more of a chance that someone's going to learn about it. Like, you learned about passive suicidalness a long time ago from an article, but, like, I had never heard of it until last week when I read your blog. So it's just like, if you hadn't shared that really vulnerable, it was probably really tough to talk about that. I mean, I've talked about my mental health lots of times on this channel, and I've never mentioned to anyone that I've been suicidal before. I've been suicidal twice in my life.
There's such, like, a sense of shame, almost like, oh, like, you're one of those people, like, you weakling. Like, it's so sad, and I don't think it should be like that, but it definitely is hard to talk about. I mean, you know,
I've had 2 times where I've told people close to me, and both times they're just like, there's nothing wrong with you. You're not suicidal. You don't need a therapist. Literally, that was told to me, and it was just, like, so degrading, and it was so hurting. Like, here I am in my deepest pain, and, like, I was just told there's something wrong with you. Obviously, this person was not my husband. If my husband learned of this, well, when we were dating at the time, he definitely was like, you should go to therapy, and, like, was there for me. But I think I actually didn't want to tell my boyfriend because I was ashamed to tell my boyfriend, you know what I mean? So I think that's why we're doing what we're doing here, and, like, even if you might have heard this before, then great. And if you haven't heard this before, then that's why we're doing it. So anyway, such a sad topic, but it has to be talked about. Okay, so I guess I wanted to talk about the other side of it, where you identified it, you did the research, you learned, you went to a therapist, and you're working on it. So I would say, I mean, obviously social media doesn't tell the whole picture, but like, you're definitely a lot stronger and you're a lot more comfortable in your brokenness. You know, it's not like, oh, I'm healed now, so that's why I'm strong, Amanda. You're like, no, I know I'm broken, and that's why I'm strong, because strength isn't about being perfect. Strength is about knowing you're broken and still getting up every day and facing it. So how do you go about, like, you work full time, right? How do you go about your daily life with anxiety and depression?
It's a very interesting, like, I have, like, page of notes on this. Like, it's a complex kind of balance.
Always changing.
Yeah, always changing, always evolving. You need to know, like, who you are and what you need. What you trial and error. You go through stuff that works for you, that's worked before. You try it. Sometimes it doesn't work the second time. Sometimes it does. Like, so it's fluctuating.
Like,
but
dang it, this tea always calmed me down, and now
it
this tea's not working.
So it's always, like, I mean, in a sense, it's you know, in a kind of interesting way, it's an adventure in one sense, in the sense that you have to really discover yourself every day and learn more about yourself every day. So I've learned a lot about myself, but in terms of, like, how I live with my mental illness now, I mean, I think it's, you know, in college I would often I would confuse distraction with healing. So I would be like, oh, like, I'm not thinking about it right now, so I'm done, I'm good,
I'm taking a break. Yeah.
But whereas, like, now I understand that, you know, just because I'm feeling good today, or just because, like, I'm distracted, I'm not thinking about it, like, that's not a way to get better. So taking active steps and really being intentional has really helped me. For example, like, when I'm starting to feel like I'm stressed and I need to be, like, I'll be like, okay, what do I need? Like, first I make sure that my, you know, physical needs are taken care of. For example, like, have I eaten? Have I drank enough water? Like, did I sleep at night? Like, that kind of stuff. And if there's something I can do about it, then I do that. but also there's practical things that I've learned that really help. But I mean, in terms of living with anxiety on the whole, there's a really great, it's a balance of owning it, but not letting it own you. For example, kind of acknowledging your pain, but at the same time not identifying with it, not letting it define you to the extent where, like, I mean, all the time
I have this, but I am not this.
Right, exactly. And it's a really hard line to walk. Like, you wouldn't imagine, like, I talked with my last week's blog was with Susanna, who is my friend who lives in Alabama, and she was talking about how, like, she owns her anxiety, but she doesn't want to, like, when she first meets someone, to say, hi, I have anxiety. Like, it shouldn't be the forefront of your existence.
Oh, that's so good.
It shouldn't define you, and, like, knowing when to disclose it to people who you trust and when to keep it, you know, private is also, like, a big part of my life. And I think it's the difference between acceptance and defeat, where, you know, you can accept something without saying, yep, I have anxiety and depression and never getting better, like, that's how it's going to be, I'm not going to work towards it, you know, towards getting better. But, you know, that would be an unhealthy approach. Whereas accepting it and realizing, I live with this is part of who I am, though it's not who I am, and, like, we can coexist. There's this awesome short film that was made by a French film company called Gobelin, and it was called In Between. Okay. And it's about this girl who, like, gets diagnosed with, she's suffering from crocodile, and the whole film is this little blue crocodile that follows the girl around and sits on her shoulder and disrupts her in every single activity she does, and it's a metaphor for anxiety. And I totally connected to this film because, like, she'll try to go talk to this guy who's sitting next to her, and the crocodile will block her, and she's physically wrestling with it off of her balcony, and it's just, like, it's such a great, like, visual representation. And at the end, like, she wants to go, like, do something that, like, even it'll be like she'll try to go answer, like, the phone is ringing and it'll be chewing up the phone so she can't answer it. It's like those are situations where someone just physically feels like they cannot function, and so, like, that really spoke to me. But then at the end of the movie, she tells it, you know, it's okay, you know, you're sweet, you know, and she kind of bonds with this crocodile, and it's so weird, but, like, kind of coming to terms. And then the crocodile kind of becomes, like, a little, like, her little sidekick, and he's just, like, when she wants to go to talk to someone, he just kind of watches, and, like, she's like, I got this. And that was so exemplary of what it's like to live with anxiety. You know, it's something that is going to be with you, and it's going to be following you around and, you know, haunting you, and it's
but you can't get rid of it all the time.
You can't get rid of it. Like, in the film, she actually picks him up and throws him off of her, like, roof, and he just comes right back. It's like, and every time she tries to fight him, he gets, like, he's persistent, you know? Right. So it's, like, it's one of those things where once you stop fighting and just be like, it's okay, we can coexist, that is when I think you make real progress. And that's, for me, when I started to make real progress, when I was like, okay, instead of fighting this, let's work with it, let's see what I can still do. That's incredible.
I never thought of it that way.
I mean, I don't want to, like, degrade anyone else's experience, but it's almost like living with any other disability. I mean, even though it's not technically a disability, but it can be sometimes debilitating. But it's like, you know, you wouldn't say, oh, well, I have a broken leg, or I have this disability, I can't go outside and ever do anything, or I can't, you know, follow my dreams or do my career that I want. Instead, you think of, okay, what do I still have? How can I still live life to the fullest that I possibly can? And how do I actually work towards maybe having more mobility than I did the day before, or more, you know, whatever it is that you're trying to get.
Strength, more confidence. This is why I love these things. Like, oh my gosh, this was so enlightening. Like, I do a lot of thinking about mental health, and I do a lot of reading, and I do a lot of searching. And I've never heard that concept. If anything, I'm such a fighter and a bulldog by nature that I'm always wrestling with everything. Probably wrestling with, hold on, guys, it sounds like my son's awake.
Hold for baby.
Hold for baby. Hold on. That's why I love having these conversations, because I spend a lot of time reading about this and studying this and going to therapy. As you know, a lot of energy goes into trying to figure out how to heal. And one of the things I've been struggling with a lot, like I was telling you earlier, was having compassion for myself. And I think because I'm such a fighter by nature, I look at my anxiety and depression and I'm like, I want to uproot you and rip you to shreds and throw you away. And I think part of having compassion is being like, you know, we didn't choose to have it, right? And what if we have to live with it? You know, like you were comparing it to someone who has a disability, not trying to say that all disabilities are equal or all illnesses are equal. Absolutely not. But what we are saying is, like, if you were born and you're not able to walk, like, are you just going to hate yourself for not being able to walk? It's not your fault. Similarly, like, my anxiety and depression stems from, like, abuse that I experienced when I was a child. And it's like, it's not my fault that I was abused. It's not my fault that was my past. I can't change it. So why am I hating myself so much for basically wrestling this crocodile,
right?
For being there when this crocodile is there because as a result of my life experiences that I had no control over. So it just really enlightens, and I hope you guys are getting something from this as well, that if you're struggling with having self-compassion and self-acceptance, it might be because you're fighting with your crocodile instead of learning how to live with your crocodile. And it doesn't mean like, oh, I have anxiety and it'll always be here and I'm gonna be miserable about it. It's like finding a way to like love yourself and handle your crocodile well. Like we can all agree that we're more capable of handling our negative experiences when we are more loving of ourselves, and we can, you can look in the mirror and go, Amanda, you are, or I'll do me. I need to do me. Mia, you are strong, capable, confident, and you've been through the ringer, and here you still are. And it's probably a better place to come from than, gosh, Mia, like, why do you have anxiety? I hate this, hating myself almost, because you turn from hating the anxiety, but because it's so connected with you, then you start to hate yourself.
Yeah.
And I think there's 3 phases when you're going through the mental health journey. I think there's awareness, and then there's compassion, and then there's real healing. You can't really heal unless you learn to accept yourself with your brokenness. And I think I'm really struggling with that because I want to be perfect and I don't want to be broken.
And it's hard because like when you're suffering from a mental illness, like it is in your head, it's part of who you are. It's very difficult for you to be able to trust your head or trust yourself or know, is this anxiety or is this normal for a human being who's going into this interview or stressful situation? Like, is this typical? Like, I don't know. So you always walk that kind of uncertainty.
Where you can't really trust yourself. You feel like you can't really trust yourself.
Right. And that can also be, that's why it can be so hard to actually, be like, no, I deserve credit, or no, this is actually really hard. I'm actually doing pretty well. Like, that kind of stuff. So it's, and also kind of like to backtrack what we were talking about before, a lot of people, it seems that there's an attitude of like, you can't say you have anxiety or depression, or you can't identify with that, unless you're one of the severe cases or because someone else has it worse. And I think that also was like a huge, like realizing that no, everyone's experience is valid, I think is also a huge step towards, that compassion and being like, hopefully you wouldn't tell your friend like, no, what you're going through, you're just imagining it. Like, you'd want to, if it was a dear friend, you'd want to say, no, like, I'm going to take care of you. Like, we got this. And like, you should say the same to yourself.
Yes. I think realizing, like, constantly reminding myself, if I spoke to somebody I loved the way that I talk to myself, I would never forgive myself. And trying to be better about speaking to yourself kindly, which is another thing that you talk about, but that we can go all day on that.
Read it on the blog.
I know. Read it on the blog. And so I guess to wrap it up, let's talk about, I want to like sum up some of the really great things that you said in terms of like how you help yourself live with anxiety. And I think even though we haven't gotten into very specific steps or whatever, I think the thing that you just shared is something that can be applicable for everyone, which is basically acknowledge that you have these things and wake up accepting that it's there instead of just wishing it were gone. So I think that's a huge first step. And then what would you say are like 3 things that you do when, let's talk about proactive care. So there's reactive care, like if you're having a panic attack, how do you calm down? Or if you're feeling depressed, what do you do in that moment? But then there's proactive care when you're having a good day and you should be maintaining your mental health. What do you do for your mental health? 3 things that you do for your mental health.
The biggest thing that I've really been intentional about lately is surrounding myself with, positivity, whether that's positive people or being very careful about what I do on social media. For example, I stopped using Facebook altogether for about 6 months because when I was on there, it was nothing but
negativity
or me being tempted to word vomit all of this pain and frustration and anger that I was feeling. And I was like, that's not going to help anyone. So that's one thing that I think I proactively do now is try to limit, like pay attention to what I'm doing, how much time I'm spending on social media or the people that I'm talking to. And if I want to talk to someone, message them privately, call them privately, like be intentional about that. Make sure that they're supportive people. Because I've had like way too many people, like you said, like I'll call them or tell them that I'm struggling and they'll be like, no, you're fine. Like your life is fine. You're so strong. Like you're nowhere near as bad as this person. Or they'll say, like I've had people be like, oh, like just, go drinking or like really, really bad, like uneducated things that they've told me or like, oh, like this drug will help. Like, so it's like just being really careful about like not to tempt myself to then it's the same thing like with our faith. Like, you don't want to put yourself in the near occasion of depression or anxiety. Like, you have to be, that's something that is a duty for me almost when I'm not, having a panic attack or not feeling depressed. I'm like, okay, well, today's a good day, so my goal is to not let myself trip up, not let myself go back to bad habits. It literally is a habit, I think. So I don't know if that was like 3 things or more than 3 things.
No.
But
that was awesome. I loved that, especially the tip about social media and just being careful about where you are spending your time, and maybe that means you need a break. Like, I know for me, I struggle with self-control in that area, because for me, my anxiety and depression can become so all-consuming that all I want to do is escape. And the easiest escape for me, especially as a mom who it's hard to get out of the house, it's social media, it's my phone. So taking a break from things is really important, because then it brings an awareness to, oh, that wasn't serving me. So I loved that. And then if you are having a panic attack or having depression, I guess if you could just share one thing you do for each of those.
Yeah, so really I've kind of like boiled it down. Like, I didn't really consciously think about this concept when you first asked me, but when I was thinking about it, it really boiled down to, when I'm depressed, the solution is motion. And when I'm anxious, the solution is rest.
That's so beautiful. Such an amazing way of such an artistic way of summing things up.
Put that on a Hallmark card. It's so true. Like, when I'm depressed, like, that's when I'm folding in upon myself and not wanting to talk to anyone or anything like that. And really understanding that, this is when I need to kind of get going, like what you were saying earlier. Maybe you said this earlier in the video, but where when you are depressed, you're kind of like, you need to get out of yourself, you need to take care of yourself, and just like, despite your head saying like, this is a bad day, you can still prove it wrong by getting up and showering and saying, no, I'm worth it, this is fine, like this, I can get through this.
Sorry everyone, my son's right outside with my husband. He's fine.
Gotta wrap it up. With anxiety, it's more like your mind is going 1,000 miles a minute, like whether it's a panic attack or whether it's just that feeling of anxiety that hangs over you, it's kind of this hyper action or this sense of like fear and like, fight or flight. And that, I think when I'm feeling that, the best chance is to just like step back and be like, why am I feeling this? Again, making sure my physical needs are met, making sure that it's not like something that I can easily solve.
Like sleep deprivation.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Like, sleeping is one of the best things. Like, if I'm depressed, sleep. If I'm anxious, sleep. Like, if I'm cranky, sleep. Like, it works. But for anxiety, like, yeah, it is that kind of taking a step back, self-care, like taking a bath, taking a shower, Skyping with a friend, like something like that actually kind of pulls me out of that. It's a signal that my body is doing too much, or that my mind is trying to do too much, or that something is triggering me and I need to figure out what it is. And to do that, I need to step back and take a second.
Exactly. Noticing what's triggering you, because if you are feeling depressed or you are feeling anxious, probably something did trigger you, and taking the time to analyze what that is and take a step back.
Right. And you have to really listen to yourself, like kind of like the crocodile again, like your anxiety is trying to tell you something. It's trying to tell you, this is tied to something that you haven't dealt with yet, or this is triggering you, or, let's slow down. And same with your depression. It's trying to tell you something.
Our physical and mental pain is an indication of something going on. Like, we need to acknowledge it. It's there for a reason. It's just like, imagine if you never felt any pain. Like, I read this story about this boy was born and his nerves or neurons or nerve receptors are not the same as anybody else. So he doesn't experience pain. And your first instinct is, wow, that's a really cool superpower. But no, actually it's like almost lethal for him, because when he was little, he stuck his hand into a pot of boiling water, like, and things like that. Like, or he like got something stuck in his foot and his parents didn't notice that he had this rusty nail in his foot because he didn't whine about it. And so it can be extremely dangerous if you don't acknowledge your pain. And I know we all hate pain and we want to get rid of it, but I think what we're being forced to do is see our pain as a really great message system, and appreciate it almost for telling us like, hey, this is painful so that I can get your attention. Otherwise it wouldn't get our attention. And in the example of this boy, here he has these like life-threatening burns, but he's not going to take care of it if he doesn't notice it's there. Right? Same thing with mental health. Like, we're not going to take care of it if we don't notice that something's bothering us, something's eating us alive, basically, internally. So I think that point's really good, that like, if you're feeling that way, take the time to ask, why am I feeling that way? What has triggered me? And maybe take extra precaution. Like, if I've had a really rough week at work, for instance, and I'm just super spent, instead of pushing myself super hard on the weekend as well, like, I'll go, I deserve a break. I'm going to take a nap, and I'm going to ask like my husband to watch my son so I can take a nap, and asking for that help and not being afraid to ask for that help and when you need it and stuff. So
yeah, and just like knowing like your I don't know, like your habits, and like I feel like I should have caught into this a lot sooner than I did, but like realizing that I was always reacting, I guess is my point. Like I was just like, oh no, like this happened. But at some point you should start to plan, like if you know you've had a stressful week, like
you know you're going to feel anxious by the end of the week. Like, I know I have a lot to do this week, so I know by the end I'm going to be really spent. So I'm not going to plan anything this weekend. Like,
that knowledge is huge. And, like, that, the ability to act on that, like, that is one of the best things that you can do. And, like, I mean, if I were to tell someone, like, to, like, don't be like me, like, listen to your body and start to establish a pattern, because it does have a pattern. Sometimes it doesn't mean that it, like, always happens. You can predict it. Like, it's not always predictable. But you can start to kind of predict, like, where you're going to need more care, or when you're going to need more care, or how to come back.
Yeah, self-awareness and knowing, like, basically just not being stupid about it. Like, for me, I always go, oh, I'll be fine. Right. It's like, that's never been a mentality that's helped me. It's the times when I can, like, look at my week. And that's why I think, like, Sunday planning is so important, to just really look at your week, and then even to reflect on the last week and go, okay, that was a little bit more than I can handle. Next time I need to learn to say no to this or whatever. But that's the whole self-awareness topic. So anyway,
for so long, like, sorry.
No, go for it.
Last thought. For so long, like, I had, like, a victim mentality where I was just so used to being like, well, like, you know, you have anxiety, like, it's just gonna happen again. Here we go again. Like, I felt like there was nothing I could do about it. And I think that was one of the biggest lies that I let it tell me, was that, you know, I had to be passive and I had to be the victim. I had to react, and then that was all I could do.
And let it do what it wanted with you.
Right. So, I think, like, that planning ahead and listening to yourself is really important.
I love that. It's like, anxiety, you're not going to have your way with me, but you can hang out by my side while I go through my day, and we'll make it work. And I'll give you the rest that you need, kind of a thing. Like, it's weird, but that's such the crocodile metaphor was so amazing. I think we should link that video down below for sure.
It's a great video.
Amanda also interviewed me earlier about self-care tips and just like my self-care journey, and like how it's helped me learn to love myself, and not like the other way around, where it's like, I love myself, so I'm going to take care of myself. When your brain is constantly lying to you, we talked about how it's hard to just sit down and go, I really love myself. So by taking tangible actions of like showering and flossing, we talked about flossing and like eating well and drinking water and taking naps, how taking those action steps has in turn started to help me love myself, which I really need help with that because I suck at self-compassion. Which I just told myself I sucked, but look, y'all, I'm learning. Like, I'm not perfect. So anyway, I will link that blog down below when she's finished with it. No hurry at all, but it was a really fun interview. And I just wanted to let you guys know that if you want to get kind of the whole story about self-care and specific actions that I take, and like how it's helped me to love myself more and be more compassionate toward myself, she'll be writing all that out in her awesome blog. And she also has a lot of other great blog posts and a great Instagram account. Love following her on Instagram. Follow her on Instagram. Anyway, that's all we have for you guys today. Thank you so much for hanging out with us, especially if you made it to the very end. You are awesome. If you haven't subscribed to me already, you should, and give this video a thumbs up. And if you like to get notifications on your phone that tell you when I made a new video, you have to click that bell, the notification bell, that'll let you know. Other than that, I think that's it. This was so much fun.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. No, every time I do this, I'm like, I need to do this more often. Like, I learned so much from you. Like,
I learned
things
so
that
much
I
from
haven't even, like, I go to a therapist and like I learn a lot from her too, but like, I think we discount how much we can learn just from each other's journeys.
Stepping outside your own perspective can be huge.
So huge. So anyway, hopefully that you guys feel the same way, that you learned a lot from this video, that you were able to get another perspective that might help you. I think at the end of the day, we want you to walk away knowing that there's nothing wrong with you, you're not alone, and that acknowledging where you're at, loving who you are, is the like 75% of the journey toward healing.
Yep.
Like, that's what we were talking about today. So anyway, we love you guys. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
That was great. Great job. I mean, that was like 3 times the charm.